Welcome to episode 90, the other AI, authenticity and inclusion. In about 20 minutes, we're going to tackle a really important question from ChatGPT, which is, I lost track of it. Here it is. When someone says this is what it came up with, not what I came up with. When someone says bring your whole self to work, do they really mean your whole self or just the HR approved parts? And so we will tackle that in about 20 minutes. I probably should have mentioned this is our Halloween episode, hence all the crazy hair.
The hair is not AI generated. This is my real hair.
All right, Eric, kick off.
So hello. Here we are with our absolutely authentic blue hair. Hello on Halloween. Welcoming Tara Nelson, who is a managing director at MTMG, which is an IT consultancy. And Tara is here to talk to us about the other AI. So welcome, Tara. Happy Halloween. We love your costume. And what is on your mind?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here, and I'm delighted that it's Halloween and we can all be a little bit crazy for a moment. But so what's on my mind? Well, that's a loaded question, but for today, I'm focused on really being authentic in how we act in business, how we're portrayed in, social media and online. So, and then also inclusion, mostly females, because I was not a female in tech for many years in my career. And the past 2 years I have been in tech, and the parity or disparity is quite alarming. So that's my little soapbox.
When you say, I'm curious when you say alarming. I mean, I know I've certainly experienced this as a tech professional or whatever. I've seen this, people who've worked for me, etc. When you say it's alarming, what are some of the things that you've seen?
Well, so statistics, they're pretty strong. It's about 27% of IT executives are women, which is fairly low. And most recently, I was at a conference and sitting in the ballroom for the keynote speaker. I just started gazing around the room and I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot of guys here. And then I really started counting who was there. And at every table, which is a table of 10, there was one woman at most. Some of them had no women. So that's 10 to 1. And I know that there are probably more women that were there because, the statistics don't always lie. But it felt really egregious in that moment. And, thinking about my own schooling, like we weren't told, oh yeah, go into science, no, it's like girls don't do science, girls don't do math. So it's just sort of
Do you think, Tara, it starts that young?
I do. Yeah, I do think it starts that young. So it's really, I think we need to go back to sort of elementary into middle school and start showing girls, modeling for girls what they can be. That you can't model what you don't see. So if you don't see women in tech, you're not going to be a woman in tech. So.
Yeah, I hear you. I think when the girls are very young, the curiosity outshines any hesitation, right? Until about, I don't know, maybe 10 or 11. Would that be about fair?
I would agree with that. Yes. Yeah.
Well, and there's so much pressure on kids, well, all of us, but kids in particular, to conform, right? I mean, a lot of what you are learning when you are younger, besides, reading, writing, and arithmetic is, you're essentially learning that anything you do, unfortunately, anything you do that is not sort of the expected, the norm or whatever gets teased, gets, insulted, gets attacked or whatever it is. And so you learn very quickly, to conform to the norm. And so you may have girls who are, interested in the sciences or, boys who are interested in, I don't know, whatever boys aren't supposed to be interested, I don't know, theater, art, whatever, who essentially don't do those things because they're just trying to fit in. And I definitely think that, it's so.
I see that a lot. I have a one of each, a son and a daughter, and I see the sort of creativity and sort of self-expression being kind of pushed out of my son more than out of, like, in other words, like, if you do something that is considered even slightly weird, like you wear the wrong color, you use the wrong kind of backpack or whatever, you're going to hear about it. But I think it's interesting, Tara, you're talking about girls, are maybe there's this more pernicious thing that is affecting, well, they're both pernicious, I think, but like there's this pernicious thing affecting girls about not going into like huge and often lucrative fields, where I think boys are being pushed out of certain activities and emotional health, etc. But interesting, given the professional direction of this conversation, I think girls are probably more affected from that, from a profession perspective, or at least
yeah. Societally, I think that they're both pretty equal. I mean, girls and boys are both, bullying is a thing, and being told they're weird is a thing. So I think that that's probably fairly equal across the board, male versus female. But it's the direction of education that is worrisome to me, that they're not allowing as many opportunities for girls to be, engaged and be excited, and helping them lean towards more STEM related subjects. So,
and here comes the question of authenticity, right? So if girls are authentically interested in a STEM field and they don't mind being geeky and dirty and go blow something up or whatever, have some other fun library type activities, how do we encourage that in the younger kids, and how do we encourage that in the kids that enter the workforce and in the workforce?
I think it really does start with education. I think we have to be engaged and be role models and mentors, and then sponsors of these girls, and be in the classroom, be in after school programs. Like, there are so many different mentoring groups out there that do a lot of different things. And I just think reaching a younger age is so important. I have a history. I mean, I've a background in teaching history. So that was not, it is his story, but we'll leave that alone for now. But because of the subject matter that I was teaching, it never seemed to really be, gender specific. But I think when you're talking about girls and science and maths, it becomes more gender specific.
So it's interesting, as you're talking, I'm remembering something from my days in the restaurant world, and we were having this conversation about inclusion. And one of the things we were talking about is it's not just that there aren't role models, but all meaning you're not seeing women in science, so you don't want to do it, but that the people who are in those fields have a tendency to believe that only someone like me can do something like I do, right? And so, in the restaurant world, you would find these situations where you'd have these, you'd have women sort of at a certain level, you'd have women, showing up at a decent, sort of percentage. And then all of a sudden you'd get up into, say, like, manager level, district manager level, RVP level, and you're just seeing this huge drop off in women. And if you sort of looked at it, as it wasn't necessarily like that the men in those roles were looking at the field of, people they could promote, and they were saying, oh, she's a woman, so I'm not going to promote her. It was more they were looking at it from the perspective of, she's a woman, she's going to need, I can't imagine how she would possibly, juggle the things that she has to do at home, taking care of the kids and whatever it is, and do the job that I do. And therefore, I'm not going to promote her because she's not like me, and I can't imagine what it would be like. And so you would see, it was funny because I remember one of the senior leaders in operations, said, single moms are sometimes the absolute best restaurant managers because they're so, they've had to deal with so many challenging things, all at once, and all these different problems and whatever. But there's this tendency for people to sort of go, I'm not going to promote somebody not because I'm trying to be mean to them, but because I can't imagine them doing what I do. And so I think that role modeling thing isn't just for the people who want to get into the field, but role modeling sort of to their peers to go, hey, girls can do science, and just because you can't imagine it because you grew up in a situation where that wasn't true doesn't mean that it's not possible. So I don't know, Tara.
Well, it's not just the promotion, right? That happens on a micro level of, I'm not going to give them the project to lead. I'm not going to give them the responsibilities that lead them to get. So this is happening every day. It adds up to people not being promoted. And I think the other part of it is, at least in tech, there's this whole tech bro culture, which I think there is a lot of self-filtering of, I just don't want to be in this toxic environment, and I don't blame them, but it has the effect of pushing people who don't want to join in that.
Right. Yeah. I had to mute myself because I thought I was going to breathe fire. I should have gone as a dragon for Halloween. But hearing that about, they didn't want to promote women because they can't imagine it. Well, I mean, how many people, like, you have to have the ability to say, okay, these things exist, like more than one thing can be true at a time. Right. And so a woman can be great in raising her children and also be great in the boardroom. Like they're not self-exclusive. So, yeah, I'm getting a little riled up here.
Yeah. Well, but and I don't, and again, I think that's the thing that makes it so complicated, right? Because it's not being done like it's more subtle than just malicious actions, right? Like, I'm going to hold these people down because they're women. I'm going to hold them down because because I've sort of been steeped in this culture that says I can't, that these people can't do it. Therefore, I'm gonna perpetuate it, but I'm not doing it on purpose. It's part of my belief system, and I'm sure we're all stuck with that. Those beliefs that we have to overcome.
But right, and so just because that's part of your sort of learned DNA, it doesn't mean that has to be true. So, and I don't know restaurant stats because that's not sort of a field I've been in. So, but just knowing that there are pretty equal, if you look at global population, it's 50-50. I mean, there's men have like a little, it's like 0.2% more than women in the whole wide world. And yet we don't have parity in jobs. We don't have parity in pay. Women make about 80 cents on the dollar to what men make. And then if you start looking at Latina and Black women, they make about 60 cents on the dollar to men. So, we need to start yelling a little louder about that. So I'm sorry. I know there's two guys here and it feels like I'm just ranting.
No, Elena, no, they're good. Let me go back to what Eric was talking for a minute, to the tech bro culture, because there is a very distinct phrase in there, and that is, you don't get it. Oh God, I have heard it again and again. And you know what I've learned? I've learned to smile broadly and say, exactly, I don't. That's why I'm going to ask you again and again until I get it, because then my customer is going to get it. And then I say this magic word, customer, and they kind of like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll explain it. And we laugh about it. But I think that there is, aside from humor in this story, we just have to kind of both sides very consciously watch like what happens when we say something so seemingly benign, right, that comes out very wrong.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, so giving someone grace in the moment is, of course, like, it's our job to educate each other, not just male to female, but just human to human. And so if you find something offensive that someone said, like, you can say it in a kind way and just say, gee, the way you just said that, I don't know if you realize that came out differently. And that's just education and grace. But constantly, I would probably have no vendors if I had to hear them say every day, you just don't get it. And I were so kind as you, Elena, and said, oh, I do get it, or I don't get it, or I'll just keep asking. Like that just wouldn't sit with me. I give you huge props.
So I have a slightly different angle that I want to bring up in this conversation, but I think it's probably equally important. And this has to do with self-belief and how you believe in yourself on this. And like this, so there's a study I remember reading about where and I think it was testing people who were part of minority groups. And if they tested them, their scores might have been lower, but if they reminded those people that they had other character, like, in other words, if they were being reminded essentially you're a woman or you're a person of color or whatever, they would go into the test and maybe not do as well as if they had been tested and reminded that not only are you a woman, but you're an excellent this and da, 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 da. And then all of the disparity disappeared. And what this was about was this sort of sense going into the test that every question you got wrong was proving that you weren't, that you weren't intended to be there, or you're, this sort of imposter syndrome concept of like, oh, I shouldn't be here. And then you get stressed on the test when you don't know something in a way that causes you undue or inflated anxiety compared to your white male, counterpart who just is like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be here, so I'm going to do that. And so I was just interested to throw that angle in. To what degree is society creating this sort of self-belief system, not just an external system of beliefs that is causing the disparity?
Yeah, that's it. At first I thought you were going where it was something that sort of helped you and like was giving you like, okay, you can do this, you can do this. And I thought, well, where was that when I took LSATs? But but then I realized what you were really saying, and I'm confounded by that, because I just, why is that a study? Like, why are we putting more pressure on people to do that? And that, imposter syndrome is sort of a daily statement that you hear. And that's so sad. Like, I don't remember we probably all felt that way as children, but it was just like, oh yeah, get on, move on, whatever, and I kind of grew up in a man's world, and I did things that women weren't technically supposed to do. And it never occurred to me to think, oh, I'm a woman, I shouldn't be doing this. I just did it. Like, there was no anything. So, yeah, that's really tragically sad, though, to think about this, especially when you have neurodivergent, which we haven't even touched on that subject in inclusivity. Right. But, there's so much harm that can be done with words and with statements that just sort of, lump you into something that you shouldn't be lumped into.
Right.
Yeah. Well, now I'm sad.
It is. I mean, it is. But I have seen or I've read books that reference that same study that and similar studies that Eric was just mentioning. So it is sad, but I think it definitely is true, and I think it leads us to. I feel like we can't continue this conversation forever without sort of talking a little bit about the fact that, inclusion, and its cousins, diversity and equity, are like on its back heel right now, and at least in this country. And I think there's this sort of missing, the point is like, sort of like, oh, we don't want to make some people, we don't want to make, I don't know, white men feel bad, or whatever it is, whatever the thought is there, or that people, are somehow getting this unfair advantage, when in fact the reality is there's all these studies from years and years of work on this that show that there were all these unfair disadvantages for people. And now here we are sort of saying, yeah, we can't even talk about those things. We can't even look at them. So I don't know if you have if anyone that wants to jump in on that one, but maybe that's like jumping on the grenade or something. But it is sort of a weird moment that we live in right now, where we know all this stuff, like this study that Eric was just referencing, whatever. Like, it's all happened. It's all out there, and the data shows that these things are true. And yet we are in this moment where it's like you either have to act like this is not true, or you might have, all the funding taken away from your university or whatever it is. So I don't know if anybody wants.
I mean, I think it's a very complex topic, in the sense that I think part of the problem that has unfortunately led to where we are now is that there are lots of, like, privilege does not equal success, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that just because you have privilege you have success. And there's a lot of people who don't feel like they're successful, who feel like they're being, excluded from the conversation. I think there's something to be said for, I hesitate. I don't want to say that I don't want to stop talking about privilege and diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I think that's wrong. But I do think there are probably ways to talk about it so that we can actually help people understand that everybody is some intersection of multiple different backgrounds. And, you might come from a poor, socioeconomic level, and that has its own, set of privileges, or lack of privileges, rather, that are associated with it, and that might have nothing to do with the color of your skin or your gender or whatever. And I think we stopped the conversation too soon, not that we've gone too far with the conversation.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I do think that we have become, I'm trying to find the, politically correct term for it. But we've now sort of become numb to what is going on in the world, and what's being said is law, and said is normal, and said is, the way things should be. And I didn't grow up in that space, and I didn't have my child grow up in that space, and I certainly do not want my granddaughter growing up in that space. And unfortunately, it's really hard to figure a way out of it at the moment. How was that for PC?
Yeah, that's
good. Elena,
although I would say that we all can kind of do our small part, right? Because like when I was growing up, never once did my parents say, don't do something because you're a girl, or do something because you're a girl. It was just go do it or don't do it. And likewise, I always said to my daughters, go do it, check it out. If you hate it, well, then great learning. The girl or not never came in a conversation. So what I'm saying is, aside from the larger picture, we all can do our small part. And that is to tell our daughters, okay, you're interested in it, go check it out, right? Or sons, likewise, go check it out. And coworkers to say, well, who told you that I don't get it? I'm all right, and just handle a lot of it gracefully, and just kind of have these conversations. So in our microcosms, we are aware of how to encourage each other.
I'm going to jump in right now because we need to get ChatGPT's question in here.
Oh dear.
Reminding you all of the question was, when someone says bring your whole self to work, do they really mean your whole self, or just the HR approved parts? Which I'm just going to note the irony that we're having this very, very serious discussion wearing these ridiculous costumes. But anyways.
Hey, we're very authentic, especially Eric with the Margie's blue hair here.
Anyway, I don't know, Tara, if you have any thoughts on ChatGPT's question?
Well, I would say that there's a a practice and a hope. The practice is that you only come with the HR approved version. The hope is that you could sort of come with your whole self. I don't think that every place allows that to happen, though. So,
Yeah.
And by the way, Tara, that actually bleeds into I think you started off with like social media and bringing your authentic self to social media as well. There's a lot of self-editing going on.
oh yes,
We've talked about that a lot. It's, you got to say the right thing or not say something that's going to piss off your, right-wing company. Or, I mean, we talked about, about Cracker Barrel, and like Cracker Barrel made a mistake, but like it's subtle how they made a mistake. What is it they actually did? They misunderstood their base, but should that have gotten them effectively like temporarily canceled as a company? It's a interesting question, right?
yeah.
Well, and I mean, we won't go into like the details, but like lots of conflicted feelings about that whole situation here as somebody that used to work there. But anyway, yeah, no, I mean, I think the reality is, I mean, I find this question a little bit of a hard question because nobody goes anywhere with their full authentic self, right? We always have to sort of adjust who we are for the context that we're in, right? The way you are in church on Sunday is not the same as the way you are, while, hanging out in a club drinking beers, right? I mean, like what's appropriate in a specific context is, changes based on the context. And so the question is, how do we not how can we bring our whole selves into work? Because no one, I think, is arguing that we should be behaving in at work the way we would behave in a club, right? But yet that may be, well, it's probably not, in my costume, that might be part of my persona, but my real life, that is not me at all, right? And so, but nobody would say, oh, I can't bring my clubbing self into work, right? And so the question really is, how do we expand expand our perspective on what is actually not appropriate for a given context, because it shouldn't, because it's because of the context, and what have we just sort of come to believe is not appropriate from the context because the only people that have ever been in that context really are conforming to a sort of a norm, right? I mean, you hear this sometimes when you hear about like people talking about like ethnic hairstyles and things like that, where it's like, well, wait a second, there's nothing, like, you are assuming there's something wrong with that because you're applying a standard that has nothing to do with people's ability to do their job to the situation. That's a problem, right? It's not a problem to be like, yeah, like maybe getting drinking 5 beers is not okay in the in the workplace. You know what I mean?
So it's contextual, though. Like, everything has context, and everything has sort of a time and a place. But I think when you're talking about your true self, I sort of frame that as your true self in the workplace, knowing that who you are in the workplace is going to be slightly, less flamboyant than who you are in the club. So, because it's sort of, we do kind of amalgamate to where we are and then go from there. So
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I mean,
I think there's two sides of this coin as well, in the sense that like there are things that would be nice not to have. Like, I think there's a lot of people, and I think where this comes in really needs to change is where the code switching that people have to do becomes stressful and anxiety provoking and is exhausting for people in the day. That needs to change. But the flip side of it, the dark side of it, is there are some things that should not be okay in work that are very much okay at work right now. I mean, we have this worship for a certain type of obnoxious leader. We talked about the tech bros. I don't think, like, we act like, well, at least until a couple of years ago, we act like Elon Musk was someone. We acted like Elon Musk was some like amazing, trailblazing genius or Steve Jobs or whatever, and they're all, when you find out, when you read their biographies, they're all total assholes, right? They're not nice people. They don't treat people well. They're not, this should not be okay. And we have this hero worship for something
misogynistic assholes. Oh
yeah. Well, not.
Well, I think it's more that we have the worship for the product of their work. We have the product worship for their outcomes and for their innovation. And I think we just kind of need to delineate that their innovation is here, their contribution is here, their leadership is elsewhere, and we just need to take off the pink goggles and just look at it for what it is. Let's not take anything away from them for a electric car or the iPhone that we all use, but acknowledge the other side. Be real.
Yeah, I guess I have a hard time with that, because then you're saying that the means justify the ends, and I can't bring myself there.
Yeah, I mean,
Not
I'm
necessarily.
100% believe that Elon Musk, without all of his innovations, we would be just fine. And not having his toxic personality involved in the world would have been a benefit to humanity, even if Tesla didn't exist. Even if
somebody else would invent the Tesla. Yeah.
Somebody would have moved that forward without him. Maybe it wouldn't have been as fast, but actually it might have been more effective because,
right. I mean, now he's such, he's so controversial that, they're blowing up Teslas, and that's not what we want. And that's not good for the environment, and that's not good for resources. So, maybe if he had stepped away sooner or not raised his freak flag as high.
I mean, he did exist, but not been who he is.
Right. So
yeah.
Well,
Well, Tara, as we've discussed beforehand, these episodes go by very fast, and before we end the episode, so we're over our half an hour period, before we end our episode, what we like to do is go around and have everybody offer one thing they want to leave our audience with. It is Halloween, so if you go scary, that's fine. If not, that's also fine. The one thing that I don't tell the guests beforehand is I always make the guests go first. You have no time to think about it. But whatever you want to leave the audience with, and go ahead, Tara.
Well, I'd just say, since all we ever talk about is AI, I'm going to throw out the, alternative option, which is being authentic and inclusive to everyone. So there's my last thought.
Awesome. So before I give my one thing, Tara, can you share what's the best way for people to connect with you or reach out to you?
As long as they're going to be nice, they can have my email, which is tk@mtmg.eu, or find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Excellent. So many great topics here. I think, this idea of thinking about, how do we kind of break out of the mold of things that we have been either trained to believe or historically believed, and get into a new mode where we go, hey, there might be another way to look at this. Going back to the restaurant leaders not promoting people because they don't look like, they're not, they can't imagine the person doing what they do or whatever it is. How do we change that? How do we get ourselves into a mode where we can see that other, people bring different perspectives, different talents, and different, approaches to the same problem, and still get the same results, and really focus on the results that they're getting, and not focus on, putting them down because they don't conform with some idea that frankly often doesn't matter and isn't relevant. So that will be my takeaway, and I'll pass it to Elena.
I'll pick it right up here and say, and what can we do for our part? Right? Without waiting for regulations and laws and government or whoever, management, the CEO, what can we do today to make a difference in our own work environment, in our kids' environment, and in our friends' environment. So can we just ask ourselves that question, like, have I encouraged my niece or my daughter or my direct report or my coworker, or have I stood up for myself? And how did I deliver a certain message? So just this type of question would, I think, go a long way.
Yeah. So my one thing that I want to bring up is something I actually didn't get to, was I saw this video. It was like a short online the other day, and it was a guy who was saying, we just all got, he was a person of color. He's saying, we just all got axed from our job at my, and I think it was some kind of media job, you know, like one of the networks or something. We just all got axed from our jobs. And what's interesting is I went to my boss and he said, we tried, but we couldn't find places for you guys to be moved around in the organization. And this person, again, who's a person of color, went around and asked everybody, and all of the white people had gotten replaced or placed in different jobs, and all of the black people and people of color had gotten axed. And he's like, what's going on? And he went to the boss and said, like, why is this, right? And the boss says, well, I just kept the people that I have worked with before. I didn't intend that to be all white people. And I think that's the point I'm trying to get to is there's this unconscious bias, there's this unconscious sort of systemic building of these problems over time that leads to the fact that the people that this guy has worked with before, for a huge number of reasons that may be in and of themselves tiny and unnoticeable, creates these sort of biases that we don't even maybe notice until the big event, and everybody's like, wait a second, how did all the women get removed from the picture here? Well, it may not be that any one person in any one event was wrong per se. It's this sort of like lack of big picture understanding that these things have. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe if he kept some of the newer people that he hadn't worked with forever, the company would still be solvent.
Right.
Yeah.
Obviously, the people that he's been working with forever have caused cuts.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not effective at their job.
Yeah, and I think Jeff and you all have been talking about the concept of, like, we might be sort of raised in an environment where we don't picture somebody who is not like ourselves or not like the people we've worked with before doing something, and that leads us to a conclusion that is wrong, and not only wrong in fact, but also in the effect, the sort of ethical effect that it has. Anyway, this has been a fascinating discussion. Tara, thank you for joining us on Halloween.
Thank you for having me.
I am not going to regret taking this this wig off. It is a little bit awkward and itchy.
Well, now you know what a woman in the 50s feels like. So see, it's just a little bit of,
just a little bit of
character building.
Anyway.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much for having me. Have a great Halloween.
Thanks, you too.